Welcome back to part 2 of the video. In this video I'll be focusing on painting the face. I forgot to mention this in the first part, but this painting took about 4 hours to paint. Now I'm just adding some light near her armpit to add some more visual interest, just so it's not all in shadow. Need to soften up some of these edges over here. It's usually easier too if you paint them as if they weren't wearing any clothes, because that way it's actually easier to add the clothes on top of it and have them be correct. So now I'm just going back in and adding in the straps. Her body is pretty much done. I'm just going back in and refining things a lot. Just trying to fix my edges, some of the transitions. You can really see how many layers I used. I have a bunch of them turned off too because there are things I didn't really like and wasn't really sure if I wanted to completely delete them yet. Every so often I'll go through the layers and delete the ones I don't need and merge the ones I'm going to keep. I'm not really happy with these pauldrons, so I think I'm going to change the shape a little bit just to make them a little more interesting. Thinking of making them a little more curved, more elegant. You'll notice that I did go through my layers and delete a bunch of them and merge the other ones. I didn't really want this female hunter to be an evil character or anything, so I'm trying to keep her armor a little on the neutral side, maybe on the good side. I just wanted to make her feel strong and powerful. If you'll look, you'll see that I actually painted over the strap. I'm not really worried about that right now. I'm just trying to paint through my shapes to make sure they're correct. I can always go back later and paint back over the strap. I do that a lot of times with clothing too. I'll just paint through the shape just to make sure it connects to the other side, and then I'll go back in and paint over on top. So now I'm adding a soft light layer. I use that a lot if I want to paint in some color, and it can also give some nice glow effects. I also switched over to the airbrush tool. Just trying to saturate things a little bit. Maybe have a little bit of a glow around the outside of her body. Now I'm switching back to the hard round brush. And I think I'm going to start working on the face a little bit more. The face is going to be an important part of this character, so I'm probably going to end up spending a majority of the time on the face. The face is where you get a lot of your emotion from your character, and I wanted to make her strong and confident, so I needed to get that through in her expression. Right now I'm just trying to map in some of the major areas of the face. I pretty much always start the face with the eye sockets and where the nose should be. I probably should have started working on this zoomed out. I think I'm zoomed in a little bit too much. Now that I'm zoomed out, I've noticed some other areas that I want to work on, so I'm starting to work on those. Just adding some hints of detail on her top. It was a little stark. Now I'm just adding some little details into her armor. Maybe if I add a couple more straps up here, it'll be a little more interesting. That way I can have a little more negative space on the other side too. And right now I'm just checking her center line to make sure everything lines up correctly. I'm starting to lose her pose a little bit as I'm rendering, so I'm just going to select all by hitting Command A or Control A and doing copy, merge, and paste. Then going to filter and liquify. Just need to increase the brush size a little bit. And I'm just going to pull her body out a little bit, just so that I can push the pose a little more. So now I've gone in and rendered her top a little more, and I'm just adding some reflected light on the bottom just to give it a little more form. And I've added the speculars on the top. Now I'm just going in and softening the edges, just so that where the top meets the skin isn't such a harsh transition. I need to add the reflected light over here as well. Now the reflected light shouldn't be as bright as the highlight, so make sure not to make them too bright. If you squint your eyes, it can actually help you judge your values more easily. Up here I'm adding some more of the orange color that's in her top, just so that I can have more color harmony throughout my painting. It's always a good idea to take your colors and add them into different areas all over your painting instead of having them just in one area, unless you're trying to emphasize something in your painting. Now I need to start working on her face a little more, so I'm just carving in her nose just so it isn't so big. Now the proportions of the face, typically there's one eye width between the eyes, and if you take an eye and rotate it 90 degrees down so that it's perpendicular, it should end at the top of the wing of the nostril. Those are the average proportions. The shadows were getting a little dark too, so I'm just lightening those. I've skipped a little ahead here. I've just been working on the face. So now I've gone in and started working on the lips. The lips are another area where you really have to watch your edges, because there are areas where you want to have hard edges and areas where you want to have soft edges. Usually the areas where you want to have hard edges is the opening of the mouth where the lips meet, and the corners of the mouth, and maybe the philtrum area, which is the area right under the nose. I kind of mentioned this before when I was talking about painting female bodies as opposed to male bodies, but the same applies here. painting female faces for me is always a lot harder because, in this day and age, we have this preconceived notion that females always have to be pretty in marketing or any other type of illustration, so it's a lot harder to paint pretty people just because you have to worry about symmetry and you have to be precise. And you have to kind of draw upon what people in that time period think is pretty. With males, it's a lot easier because you can kind of rough things up and make things a little wonky, and it still looks good because it adds a little bit of character to their face. But with females, you have to be delicate and soft, for the most part, anyway. It's interesting though because people's idea of what's pretty changes from decade to decade. And nowadays, you're supposed to be skinny in order to look aesthetically pleasing. So right now her face is still pretty rough, so I'm just trying to block in the main areas. I still need to refine a lot of things. I'm going back to the 100% hardness round brush. You'll notice that sometimes I zoom in using the little bar on the upper right, but other times I just use the buttons on my tablet that I have bound to zoom. Man, I really need to fix her jaw. It's pretty crazy. So now that I've zoomed out, her head looks like it's a little too small. So I'm just going to select it with the marquee tool. And I'm going to do a copy, merge, and paste. And then do a free transform. And I'm going to select the move tool, and then I'm actually going to move the face with the arrow keys on my keyboard. That way I can be a little more precise with my movements. I just gotta erase out the parts that I don't want. Trying to cut down this side of her face too, so it's not so big. I'm actually going to use the liquify tool to move her features around. This is also a good way to get some different character in your face without having to repaint everything. Now I'm just flipping back and forth, checking to see what it looks like. I actually don't like it, so I deleted it. I've gone in and refined her face a little more. I've made her jaw a little bit smaller and made her nose more streamlined. I really enjoy painting faces, so I'm actually spending way too long painting her face. I'm just kind of noodling everything, which can actually be a detriment sometimes because you get carried away and you get further and further away from your initial idea. You can definitely over refine things sometimes. Now I'm going back to the liquify tool, so I'm just gonna select her and do a copy, merge, and paste. And I'm gonna make her head a little bit wider. I think the reason I keep going back to the liquify tool on her face is because I'm not really happy with what she's looking like right now. I'm not really sure what it is, but something just seems weird. Gonna erase that back out a little bit. Going back and talking about how you can over refine a drawing, I think that's actually part of the problem with my face. I just keep refining so much that I'm actually losing part of the structure. I think if I kept my strokes a little more loose, it would have helped. I'm just checking the changes here by flipping back and forth. So I guess going back and talking about what people consider aesthetically pleasing in female faces, I mentioned symmetry, and I think that's a big factor in what people consider beautiful. Typically when people think of females, they think of large full lips and big eyes. Her head still looks too small, so I'm just gonna select it and use the free transform tool to make it a little bit bigger. Long necks are something I think a lot of people think about when thinking about beautiful females. So I just really wanted to give her a long neck and make her feel a little more elegant and kind of regal at the same time. A lot of the Golden Age illustrators like Charles Dana Gibson and J.C. Leyendecker gave their females really long necks. When I'm painting hair, I try and group things into large clumps, and then I'll go back in and paint in some strands of hair here and there. You don't want to paint every single strand of hair. You want to kind of give an impression of what the volume of hair is doing. So now I'm going in and flattening the image and adding a soft light layer. And using the airbrush tool, I'm going to go in and add some more saturation to the face. I need to try and match the same colors that are in the rest of her body. I'm just trying something out, but that doesn't look very good. I think I'm actually going to make her hair more blue in the shadows. adding in a little bit of blue around her mouth. Typically on the face you'll get a little more blue around the mouth, and then the forehead you'll have a little more yellows, and then in the nose and ears you'll actually have more red because of all the blood vessels, and the cheeks too. I'm just adding in some more color on her lips. I think her expression is wrong for what I actually wanted. I think she looks a little too sullen. I think I need to make her look a little more powerful and engaging. I just realized too that the angles in her face are different. So if you hold your pen up and measure the angles of her eyes, and then go down to the angle of her mouth, they're actually different. So I'm just gonna select the mouth and then do a copy merge and paste and rotate it a little bit. So I'm still working on the face, and I've actually changed it quite a bit. I've made her chin shorter, and I made her nose a little more upturned, and just her face in general is a lot rounder. Right here I'm going to change the levels with an adjustment layer, and it's the little half black, half white circle, and you can just click that and go to levels. And I'm also going to change the color balance using the same type of adjustment layer. Now these adjustment layers are really cool because they don't actually change the painting underneath them, so if you don't like the changes you can just turn off the adjustment layer and you'll still have your original painting. I am still trying to get the size of her head right, so I'm just going to transform it again. I always have to try and find this weird balance with head size just because usually smaller heads make the figure seem more important and more powerful, and it gives them that commanding presence like a hero would have. But at the same time it can look kind of weird because some people might think the head is too small. But if you make their head too big, or even just normal size, they seem a lot less important, and sometimes they seem too short. So just trying to find that balance can be tough sometimes. Still checking the different sizes. Right now I'm just adding in some more fill light on her breasts and also on the other side of her body. I decided to use a bluish fill light just because it's the complement to all the oranges in her body. I'm also using the fill light to describe some of the forms that are on that side of her body instead of having to render everything out. You can just hint at the way forms interact. I mentioned before how you should take advantage of as many figure drawing workshops as possible, but I know there are a lot of people out there asking, well, what do I do if I don't go to an art school, or if my art school doesn't really offer very many figure drawing workshops? I mean, there are tons of places you can go to draw from life. And you can go to a park or a cafe, or you can go to a subway or take a trip on a bus. I mean, there's even the internet, and there's so many different things you can find on the internet. And you can even go to a library and look at books there. One thing that I've noticed, though, with going to the bookstore and looking for anatomy books or figure drawing books, a lot of them use really blown out lighting, and they don't have very good shadows. Like, they use a lot of ambient lights and fill lights. So the best place I found is to actually go to the photography section. There are some pretty good books there, and they have some pretty good lighting too. I actually found this really good photography book. It's called Nude Photography, The Art and Craft, and it's by this guy right here. It actually has some really good lighting in it, so be sure to check that out. Right now I'm just going in and I made a new soft light layer, and I'm adding in some more saturated colors on her face, and I'm using the airbrush tool. One thing that you have to be careful with when you're drawing in public is that you're going to run into some people that get really mad when they see you drawing them. I've actually run into this a couple of times, so just be warned, you might have some people get really angry with you. There are a lot of good websites out there too for artist resources. There's this one called characterdesigns.com, and they have a lot of different photo shoots with some really good figures with some good lighting, and they have both clothed and nude figures. Another place that you can go to is conceptart.org, and they have a section where people post images that they found from all over the internet that you can draw from. But when at all possible, try and draw from life. It's just a lot easier to see what the form is doing and how the light is interacting with it. And a lot of times you'll draw from magazines or photos, things tend to look flat. Plus a lot of times you'll get some kind of camera distortion from the lens. Another place you can go check for life figure drawing is just to check with your local university. A lot of times their art programs will have figure drawing workshops that you can go to. Usually non-students have to pay like $5 or $10 per session, but it's pretty worth it. I've been talking a lot about figure drawing, but you need to try and draw everything. Draw environments, interiors, exteriors, draw props, draw animals, just anything you can get your hands on. That way you can start building up your visual library so that when you need to draw something from your imagination, you can do so. People that are looking to go into the concept art industry and video games and film, you're going to end up needing to know how to draw all these things. It's going to be very rare where you find a job where you only do characters, or you only do creatures, or you only do environments. I mean, those are things that everyone wants to do, so it's going to be very limited. You're going to have to be able to draw characters, creatures, interiors, exteriors, environments, weapons, props, effects, all that kind of stuff. So just the more versatile you are, the more easily you'll be able to find a job. And while I'm on the subject of concept art and video games, a lot of people ask me if you have to know 3D. You don't have to know 3D, but if you do know 3D, it's going to give you an edge over the people that are trying to get the same job as you. Again, the more versatile you are, the better your chances are with getting a job and even just maintaining a job. It all really depends too on the project, because if you're working on an MMO, then you're probably going to have a consistent concept for coming in and out. But if you're working on a 1 or 2 year project, the concept art cycle might be pretty short, so when the concepts are finished, they're probably going to need you to move on to other things, like maybe texturing or modeling or UI design. If you can do those different kinds of things, then you're more of an asset to the company. I want to talk a little bit about what I just did. I just added a texture overlay to my image, and the way you can do that is that you just open up your texture file, and then you can hit select all to select the entire image. And then you just go up here to edit, define pattern, and you can just name it. And you go over here to the bucket tool, and you just go up here and click pattern, and then you select this. And it should be at the very end of the list. Now just make a new image and make sure this is selected, and there you go, there's your pattern. it won't actually tile correctly, so if you want it to tile, you're going to have to go in and make it tile yourself. Once you have that pattern made, just go to the image that you want to apply your texture to and add a new layer and set that layer to either overlay or soft light. I used to use overlay, but lately I've been using soft light just because it doesn't change the values as much. So once you change it to soft light, you just go to the paint bucket tool and select your pattern and then fill the entire layer. Then I'll usually take the opacity of the layer down to about 30%. I think her face actually got a little too saturated compared to the rest of her body, so I'm just gonna go and add a new layer and make it a color layer. And I'm gonna select this yellowish orangish color, and I'm just gonna go in and desaturate her face a little bit, just so that it matches more. Right now there isn't much color variation in her face, so I'm just gonna go and add a new overlay layer, and I'm gonna choose a reddish orange color. With the airbrush, I'm just gonna go in and paint a little more red into her nose and cheeks. Make that a little bit darker. That way there's just a little more variation in her skin tone. Maybe a little more red in the lips too. Now I'm going to go back and paint opaquely on top of that. Just reinforce some of the darks, like in her eyebrows. Actually, I need to go and start painting her eyes. When people look at faces, they tend to focus on the eyes, so I really need to try and refine her eyes more to help engage the viewer. I'm thinking maybe she can kind of be looking back towards the viewer with her eyes slightly shut. I just want to give her this look that she knows what she's doing and she knows she's a badass warrior and that she's not afraid of you. The highlight on the nose is usually one of the brightest highlights on the face. A lot of times it'll be the forehead and the nose that have the brightest highlights. And as you continue down the face, the highlights become dimmer and dimmer. So make sure not to make your other highlights as bright as the one on the nose or on the forehead. A lot of times when I'm painting the face, I'll pick areas that I want to refine, and then I'll leave the opposite side of the face a little loose and unrefined. So that's one of the reasons I'm leaving the other side of her face a little ambiguous. I'll just end up going in and adding a few hints here and there. The main reason I do this is to save time, but also to give it more focus on parts that are refined and just to give it a little more sense of depth. Her eye looks a little off, so I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm using the arrow keys to move it around. So this eye over here I'm not going to refine as much. Well, that's the end of part 2. I'll see you in part 3.